Speciation in the Cane Toad by Cannizzo. There are millions, perhaps even billions, of different species of living organisms on Earth. There is strong evidence for the theory that all living organisms evolved from a common ancestor. The process by which one species, over time, evolves to become many is known as speciation. Consider two populations of the same species that, for whatever reason, stop interbreeding with each other. This leads to reproductive isolation. Alleles that arise in one population will not be transferred to the other population. Over a long period of time, the two populations may become genetically different enough that they form two distinct species. But why would two populations within the same species stop interbreeding? If the populations are separated by a barrier, they would not be able to mate. This is known as allopatric or geographic speciation. Allopatric speciation is defined as the formation of new species in populations that are geographically isolated. But populations of the same species might stop interbreeding even if they are not geographically isolated. This is known as sympatric speciation, the formation of new species in populations inhabiting the same geographic region. This video will review these two concepts of allopatric and sympatric speciation in the cane toad. The cane toad originated in Hawaii, but is very different from the cane toad that is now in Australia. Variation occurred in the cane toad due to geographic isolation. This began when humans moved part of the population from Hawaii to Australia. Now we have two separate populations of the cane toad, one in Australia and one in Hawaii. The Australian toads now have very different selective pressures acting on them as opposed to when they were in Hawaii. The region of Australia is very dry and scarce of food, which is much different from Hawaii's lush environment, which had an abundance of food for the toads. The toads now must travel to find food, but are finding it very difficult to survive given these new circumstances. Over many generations of random genetic mutations, a mutation came along that would actually be able to benefit the toad's survival. The adaptation of longer legs was able to help the toads travel across the region of Australia much faster. The long-legged toads are now able to survive and live long enough to breed and pass on their genes. Now the original toad is almost completely gone and replaced by the toad with long legs because it is better adapted to the environment of Australia. Over time, the cane toads in Australia become much different genetically than the cane toads in Hawaii. Each population of toad develops a unique genetic fingerprint. If these two different populations of cane toads were to be reintroduced and mate, they would not produce viable offspring because their genetic differences are too great. They have become two distinct species. Back in Hawaii, the toads are demonstrating sympatric speciation because while inhabiting the same geographic location, their dietary preference is changing how they operate. On the main island of Hawaii, there are spiders and there are insects. Some of the toads have begun to prefer eating spiders, while others of the toads have begun to prefer eating insects. These two subpopulations will continue to breed amongst themselves and pass on their genes, causing future generations to become more and more adapted to either eating spiders or insects. If a spider-eating toad and an insect-eating toad were to breed and have offspring, their offspring would not be well adapted to eating either spiders or insects, and the hybrid population would die off. This would leave us with only the subpopulations of spider-eating toads and insect-eating toads. Over time, the spider-eating toads and the insect-eating toads will become so genetically divergent that it will come to a point where they will no longer be able to produce viable offspring and therefore be a totally separate species. In summary, new species develop from common ancestors through the process of speciation. Today's presentation has reviewed allopatric speciation, in which geographically separate populations of the same species evolve to differentiate into two separate species, and sympatric speciation, in which a species sharing the same geographic space evolves to become two separate species.
That's all, folks.